Hey, it's Rod Yates here. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest for the next hour is Australian singer-songwriter Natalie Imbruglia. So when Natalie released the song Torn in 1997, it was such a big hit that it helped her debut album sell more than 7 million copies and earned her 3 Grammy nominations. For a lot of people, that was maybe the first they'd heard of Natalie, but she was already a big name in the UK and Australia after starring on the TV show Neighbours, which also gave people like Kylie Minogue and Guy Pearce their starts. After that initial burst of success in her musical career, things got a little rocky. There were definitely some hits. Natalie's third album, Counting Down the Days, debuted at number 1 in the UK, but then her fourth album, Come to Life, was only released in Australia and New Zealand and shelved everywhere else. After that disappointment, she took some time away from music before launching a comeback in 2015 with a covers album called Male, but even that wasn't the album she'd originally hoped to make and was one of the reasons she spent the next few years battling writer's block. Eventually, she overcame it though, and she's just released her new album Firebird, which is her first album of original material in 12 years and features co-writes with artists like KT Tunstall and Albert Hammond Jr. of The Strokes. We talk about all the ups and downs of Natalie's life and career in this interview, but we started by talking about her new album, Firebird. On a very base level, how does it feel to have your first album of all original material in 12 years about to come out?
Well, it is all original material for the very first time. I always have 1 or 2 cover songs on my albums. I hadn't even noticed that until the very end, to be honest. It feels amazing, especially because I had this period of writer's block, which was quite debilitating. And I don't even think for the first few years of it, I was honest with myself that it was happening. I do feel like in life you have these periods where you're in flow. And there's other periods of your life where you can put the same amount of effort and you just feel like it's a struggle. And I'm just in one of those flow periods, but I do feel like it's also to do with decisions you make and effort you put in as well. It's just when grace meets effort. And I feel like I'm having this experience. So I'm just blissed out, to be honest.
What are some of those decisions that you think you made that helped you get to this point?
Well, overcoming my writer's block, I was writing with Luke Fitton and Fiona Bevan and Rachel Ferner, very talented songwriters. And we wrote some beautiful songs at the very start of the process, but I still could feel that I was holding back. And I said to my managers, I need to go to Nashville. I've written in Nashville before. I actually wrote Smoke from my first album in Nashville, Under a Tree with Matt Bromley. That rhymes.
Nice.
And I know that people move their whole families and lives there to make a career out of songwriting. They're very focused. They're very skilled. They do this day in, day out. And I wanted to freak myself out. I wanted to book 2 sessions a day. And I knew it was going to be hard on my ego, on my confidence, but this is the thing that I needed to burst through. So that's what I did. I went, there were tears, there were some terrible songs, not because of my co-writers, mainly because I was just not having an opinion. So I would sit in the room and I'd go, oh yeah, that sounds great. And that's not how you write a song. You have to be willing to say, that's not how I would express that. That's not me. And so I think I wrote enough that didn't feel representative of me, whether it was because it was R&B or because I wouldn't say that. I can't blame the people I'm working with. They're just trying to help me write a song. So I think by the time I wrote When You Love Too Much, we just chatted. Caroline Watkins and I just chatted for ages. And that was a song that I felt 2 people in a room who've been through heartache were able to encapsulate a particular side of that, When You Love Too Much, in a song. Right. And it was so exciting. And that was where it all started. And then you couldn't stop me. Then I just thought I was a genius. Not quite a genius, but you know what I mean. It's just that thing of like, I was so excited to not be frightened that it just became so much fun.
Well, what do you put that fear down to?
I know exactly what it was. My last original material, which was during a time where all the record companies were folding, I was inherited by so many different labels. So many people were trying to change who I am. I made a beautiful album with Ben Hillier. They tried to dumb it down. They were trying to make me more pop. I don't know what they were trying to make me. By the time I put it out, I think I had independent funding. Then Island Records signed me. I had 3 Coldplay songs on the album, and then I got dropped. And they only released it in New Zealand and Australia. That's going to kick you in the guts. And
this is the Come to Life album.
The irony of the title just gets me every time. So, that was traumatizing. And I really believed, because I'm quite a spiritual person, that the universe was saying, you shouldn't be doing this.
I mean, how do you even pick yourself up to get to that point where you can make that decision after that? Because it must be soul destroying.
I spent a lot of time in Australia. I spent a lot of time in Currumbin Creek. That was good therapy for me, on a stand-up paddleboard. So I did a lot of soul searching, and I was very fragile. I did X Factor as a judge for a year. That was great to put my energy into other people. I think, focusing outside of yourself when you go through something like that is very healthy. And met 3 beautiful girls that I coached who I still am in contact with, who I was very concerned for their psychology, being on a show like that, and wanted to be there for them after. They tell me I was quite tough, but it was coming from a good place. And then I moved to the States. I wanted to study acting. That was a passion that I had before music, that I felt like, because Torn happened overnight, that song, and that changed my journey. What if this original plan to do acting was unfulfilled? So, and I just love I'd never done formal training. So I don't regret that decision, because I studied with Ivana Chubbuck and I honed a new skill, which I did a play, an Alan Ayckbourn play, and got to utilize that. Yeah. And music found me. A guy was on my case. I met this guy and he kept saying, you should be doing music. You should be doing music. Stephen Greener. And then he was like, you've got to meet these managers. And I ended up meeting managers and kind of got back into music, and was told I was doing an original material album, and once again was made to do a covers album. Interesting. So I'm only really being honest about that now. But I think also at the time I had writer's block. So I was kind of like, okay, well, I don't have to confront that fear.
Right.
But it wasn't what I signed the deal for.
No. Well, it's another bruise to your confidence, isn't it? It's someone saying that we don't think you have an album of original material in you. So let's do the male album, which is what came out of that covers album.
Exactly. But at the meeting, it was like, we only sign real artists. So, of course, I've got the head of this label, Sony Masterworks in New York, saying this to me. And I'm thinking, I remember looking out the window of the building and going, never look a gift horse in the mouth. And I just thought, take this opportunity. And then the managers broke it to me that I had to do a covers album. So anyway, the great thing about that, and this is where you have to look at these things, some things are meant to be, was I reconnected with my audience. I was on stage doing acoustic tours of this beautiful album that I got to do. And it made me realize my audience was telling me they wanted to hear what I had to say. And also, there's nothing quite like singing your own story. And I miss doing that.
After doing that male record, was it quite clear to you then that you were going to actually knuckle down and pursue another album of original material?
Yeah, and that's when the whole confronting the writer's block. But I was also then with the right team around me, 2 amazing female managers that allowed me that time to get over that respected me enough to go, look, she needs a bit more time, and didn't rush me into signing something and I have to give a lot of credit to them for the patience, because obviously they don't earn till I earn.
Right.
And they really believed in me, and they let me take that time. I'd love to churn an album out a year, but it just doesn't seem to be happening.
Were there certain tools that you were able to lean on during that period of your writer's block? Must be terribly confronting. Were there certain coping mechanisms that you developed to get through that period?
I think over the years, just years and years of songwriting, I think wisdom comes just from the practice of it, that it is a practice. It's a formal, you have to show up. I had to show up for myself. I had to leave the critic out of the room, things that I've learned, the voice in your head that's just saying you cannot say that out loud. That's a terrible idea. You have to be able to override these things and dare to suck. And just, if you write a shit song, I mean, does it matter? Who cares? And a very big star told me once, a musician said to me, even they have to write 100 terrible songs to write a good one. And it always stayed with me, because you always think it's only you doing that. And I think if you imagine there's this gold mine that you're getting to, and, if a song's not quite right, you know that you're leading towards that. I think it's very exciting.
So when you started to overcome that fear and the floodgates open and you start writing songs and Build It Better comes out, Nothing Missing comes out, which was a co-write with KT Tunstall, and they're real songs of empowerment. And Nothing Missing in particular has that idea of overcoming fear. Is this you using these songs as a catharsis, as a way to release this pent-up frustration of the previous years?
100%. And it's also, sometimes you're doing it before it's happened. So you listen to the song and it sounds like I've already arrived at that realization, but I'm telling myself to try and arrive. Nothing Missing specifically, when I worked with Katie, who is a phenomenal artist, who is such a powerhouse, there's someone who I admire, who I wish I could do as much as she does. She's so prolific and she's just such a hard worker. She makes me feel lazy, and a phenomenal songwriter. And what I love about this is she's an artist that can afford to be selfish when she's writing a song. That's been her process, but she got herself out of the way. And I said, look, we spent a day. I always say to people, my new way of songwriting is to just get into the energy of the person I'm writing with and talk. Mm-hmm. Just talk. So we spent most of the first day talking. And I said, I'm just overwhelmed by this realization that nothing is missing inside of me. I spent 10 years after my divorce trying to fill a void or fix something, and whether it was through therapy or whether it was through I've got to settle down or trying to conform to social norms, and then found myself in a situation where I'm quite a control freak. So I found myself in a situation where life was saying, and as a woman, there's obviously the biological clock, there's all these other elements, and I had to make some pretty big decisions. But before I became a mother, I realized that there was nothing missing. And she could just see I needed to get this. She's like, well, that's the title, and we're writing it today. And she just jumped on board, got in my head, and helped me write this great song.
Well, how important were some of your collaborators to the album? People like Katie and Alban Hammond Jr. How did they help you along the way to, again, getting past that writer's block into making an album that felt true to you?
I can't believe they said yes. Albert had tried to write with me many moons ago. We've been friends for a long time. I'm a massive Strokes fan, so I was probably the front rower at most of the shows back then. And he was always like, we should write together. And I was like, yeah. No way, I'm terrified. So after I got over this writer's block and I had all this confidence, I reached out to him and he said yes. So then it was a case of logistics. So he was with his partner, they were in LA, and he was able to get to Australia when I was going home for Christmas. So he brought Gus over with him, his engineer, producer, bestie, and we were able to have this really fun, magical time in the hinterland of Byron. My friend John Callanan owns Rocking Horse Studio.
Oh, right.
And so I pulled a favor. And so we were in this incredible empty Rocking Horse Studios with a pool and rainforest and cicadas. And I was like, oh my God, this is the dream. So it was a very easy process and a very fun process. And he instilled a lot of confidence in me. I think, I haven't told this story, but I went back to London and tried to rewrite our song because I had this confidence breakdown. And he was just like, what have you done? There was nothing wrong with it. And I was like, oh, but this thing that I wrote, that lyric was a bit silly and it doesn't really make any. And he's like, it's great. Just leave it. Right. So I thought that was kind of cool because, sometimes you're trying to make something better or hone something. And it's, he was like, you did great. It's fine.
It sounds like there's almost a constant battle in your head about things such as this, about revisiting songs or is what you've done good enough? Is that true? And have you always dealt with that?
I think in the past, I felt obviously, for obvious reasons, having a hit with a massive song that's a cover, you kind of want to kind of prove yourself or for yourself more than other people, just feel like you can do it. So that's always been important to me. But I think more than that, I've always had, the penny dropped when I realized my gift is not to be a musician or even necessarily to be a singer or the best songwriter. I'm a communicator, a teller of story. And the way I deliver an emotion, only I can do it the way that I do it. And so I kind of saw value in that. And that's when things changed for me, because it wasn't about trying to be the best songwriter anymore, or, you know, like my truth is enough.
When did you have that realization?
I think it was probably around the time I got over the writer's block.
Okay.
I think it was around that time. That's when it really, and you know, age is a great leveler.
Right.
I think just being alive as long as I have, you just settle into yourself. I really don't care what people think like I used to. And I've never released an album that I felt so sure is great. And I don't even mean by someone's standards. Just like it's my story, and I'm so excited that it's going to give people hope or make them cry in a good way or get them dancing, or they're going to be driving in a car and it's going to like make their day better.
Yeah.
Just simple things. I'm like, that's why I do it. It doesn't, I don't care about arriving somewhere or getting some great review. And it's interesting that I was in that place before it was released, and I've just been so well received on this one. So
yeah, that's great. There's clearly a determination on your part to get to this point, to work through that writer's block. Is that something you've always had? Did you have that when you were young?
Yeah, that's thanks to my parents, especially my mum. My mum, when I wanted to start singing, she said, no, you're a dancer. You do enough. We're not paying for singing lessons as well. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go and find a teacher myself. Or when I wanted to get an acting agent, no, you're not doing that. Got on a train, went to Sydney, got one, and was like, and then started earning money, and she started going, oh, okay. And when I wanted to quit tap dancing because I was upset with my tap teacher, Diane, she was like, no, you're just angry right now. You love tap dancing. You're not quitting. I was so angry with my mother. And I think these are things that give you a boundary and a perspective that you take with you forever. And I'm grateful that my parents were a little bit hard on me, and they weren't show busy and they weren't mollycoddling. I think it's given me the tools I've needed for an industry that you have to have, let's face it, rhinoceros skin.
Yeah. Did they understand your love of show business or entertainment and wanting to get into those fields?
I mean, they understood my love of it, but they were like, what is this whole other small town? I'm from the central coast of New South Wales.
Yeah.
It was just like, what is all of that? So I don't think it's a world they necessarily wanted to be a part of, but they wanted me to be happy. I think it was intimidating for them when I was younger. But I mean, I was 16 and a half, so I can appreciate that now. At the time, I was like, get over it. I'm moving to Melbourne. And now I just think, what was I doing? Where did that come from?
Well, that move to Melbourne at 16 to go to Neighbours, obviously I'd like to talk to you about that, but just a little bit more about growing up in Berkeley Vale on the Central Coast. What, for people who aren't in Australia, can you describe that area?
Berkeley Vale is a coastal, well, Berkeley Vale's not on the coast. It's like 10 minutes from the beach. But I went to school up the road from Shelley Beach at Our Lady of the Rosary.
Okay.
So it's your childhood is immersed in nature. And I was on the beach every weekend. My friends lived on farms. So I was around, horses, and there's no city. Did have the highest teenage suicide rate.
Right.
So not a lot for teenagers to do.
Yeah.
Back then that was. I can't say that stat's correct now. But, I think there was also a feeling for one who's ambitious to get out at a certain age. But I had an incredibly happy childhood there. I grew up on Wombat Street. Tickles
you couldn't
me.
get more Australian, unless it was Koala Street.
I just love that.
That's great. So where does your little town that you grew up in, where do you get exposed to? Because I know you started dancing very early. I think you were 3 when you started doing Scottish dancing lessons. Where does this even feed into your psyche that you're aware of this happening?
The dancing was copying my big sister, who I was probably always trying to emulate, and I thought she was mum's favourite. Like she was the bookworm and I didn't like reading. I think I was undiagnosed dyslexic, to be honest. I was creative, but I definitely think, I obviously can't prove this, but I think some people have a certain destiny. So I used to say to my mum, I want to be a hairdresser through the week and a star on the weekends. And that was before I don't have that memory. So I would have been 3 or 4.
Wow. I wonder what informed that, because if your parents didn't have those ambitions, it's just one of those things.
It's interesting you say that because my dad was in a band called The Birds and the Bees.
Okay.
And he was a vocalist and he sang a lot. And I've often wondered, because I like that, I find it really interesting, that concept that I could have taken on my father's unfulfilled ambition to be a singer. It's possible. It's possible that some of it's that and some of it's destiny. And but thinking about that doesn't get you the answer. But I find it interesting. My dad still has a little man choir and does his little gigs. So, it could be that.
Did you sense that when you hit it big musically that your father was on the sidelines looking on and living through you?
Yeah, very sweet. Makes me emotional because he's very, very, very proud.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
So your dedication to dance when you were growing up, did you want to be a ballerina? Was that where you saw you hoped to end up?
My first dream was to be a prima ballerina. And then I realized that genetically I didn't have the arch on my foot or, the physicality that was perfect for that. Probably fed into my dysmorphia because I was OCD, very detail oriented. And when you dance from a young age, you're looking in the mirror and it's the line of the body. And so those things, but I think I don't blame dance for that because I think that I would have had that obsessive detail oriented nature with whatever I did. And it gave me so much joy. But when I realized I couldn't be a prima ballerina, that's when I was like, well, I don't want to be a chorus girl, which cracks me up. So I was like, I've got to branch out into other things and acting and singing. And that's kind of where that came from.
And so, you mentioned the dysmorphia when you were looking in the mirror. How does that manifest?
I have no idea. I think it is a combination of being detail oriented. And when you're dancing, it's about the line of the body and wanting things to be perfect. And it's just in my nature to be that way. So it's just something that's always been there that I've learnt to live with.
And you mentioned that you're 16 and you decide to leave school and move to Melbourne. And so when you moved to Melbourne, had you already landed the role in Neighbours or did you move to Melbourne to audition?
I'd landed a guest appearance, which was 2 weeks on the Gold Coast. And I had the time of my life. And then I was offered the permanent role. And I remember I was in Sydney at my friend Melissa Thomas' house, who was an actress who I met at McDonald College. And I remember jumping up and down in the living room and calling my parents and saying, you can't stop me, I'm going.
Did they try to stop you?
I think they were just frightened of me. I think I was just an absolute nightmare. I think that they were worried if they tried to put a lid on it, that I would run away or not speak to them. And I have to say, some children are unstoppable with their determination. And I don't know that if they'd, through brute force, tried to stop me, whether that would have been the right decision. So I think reluctantly they let me go.
After the break, Natalie talks about the giant success of Torn and how it impacted her career. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Natalie Imbruglia. Before the break, Natalie was talking about joining the cast of the TV show Neighbours at the age of 16, which is where we pick up the conversation.
I just had a flashback to writing a list in my bedroom because I wanted out and I wanted showbiz. And I wrote a list. I wrote, I'm going to get on Neighbours E Street or Home and Away. I'm going to be a movie star. And then I'm going to do albums. I can't remember which order the last two were in, whether I said movie star first or make music and then. I wrote a list. Kind of wild that some of it's happened. And
Really?
I had that, when you're a kid and you're not frightened of anything, I've tried to tap back into that energy because I possibly manifested it with that little list that I wrote. I mean, that's what they tell you to do, right? Write down a list of what you want, manifest it. Well, unbeknownst to me, that's what I was doing. And so I knew that if I got on one of those shows, it was a stepping stone, it was a way out. So that's why I needed the agent in Sydney. That's why when my mum said no, I just figured it out myself. I was going to McDonald College, so I had access to, which is a performing arts college. It's for anybody that doesn't know. McDonald's is a bit of a weird, So I had access to suddenly actors I was seeing on dramas were my friends.
Right.
And so that's where that all started, I think.
How old are you when you made that list, do you think?
I would have been year 7 or year 8, probably year 8. Actually, year 8 or year 9.
It's easy to forget how big Neighbours was, and still is, but particularly back then was. I mean, you were really heading into the spotlight It couldn't get much bigger on Australian TV at that point. What was it like jumping into that bubble? And did you learn tools to survive with that focus and that intensity of public scrutiny?
I mean, initially I thought it was great, and I couldn't wait to get out the studio at Nunawading and have the taxi driver ask me, "What are you doing there?" So I could tell him I'm on Neighbours. I mean, you're a kid. It was super exciting. But that wore off very quickly, and the negative sides of being famous kicked in, and I went, oh, wow, it doesn't feel how I thought it was going to feel. So the good thing about this was I processed very young. And I think, I went through a period of just being really annoying, and my family thought that I was an egomaniac. And I'm sure adjusting to fame is it's not an easy thing to adjust to. And so, I forgive myself for being a bit unbearable for a minute, because you do suddenly have a lot of attention and everything. But I figured out, and you're also existing in an adult world very young. So no one told me to sign on and sign off to get paid, and, just basic things. I was like, Mum, how do I pay the phone bill? I didn't know how to function, but I was in this adult world and protected because I was on this show, and there was runners who took me grocery shopping, but I was fine with it. I was happy to I always wanted to be older than I was in an adult, so I was okay with it. Baptism under fire. But, I was just like every other girl before I got on the show, watching Kylie going, she's the best, most incredible thing I've ever seen. I want to be her,
Yeah.
So I just took it in my stride and had a great time.
And so when you left a couple of years later and headed to London, what was the plan?
I'd recorded some demos in Melbourne and tried to get music management, but they wanted me to do dance, girl band stuff. And I was recording things like Sean Colvin's Steady On.
Right.
All of 16. I was like, I'm just too young. I'm not going to be taken seriously. In my head, I wanted to tell these stories. And, I was listening to Tori Amos and I was wanting to be a kind of artist that at that age, they weren't interested in signing people like that. So I went to the UK to do a pantomime. That's how I got there.
Yeah.
To make some money so I could get jobs after Neighbours.
But there was a period there where, from what I understand, you didn't work that much in the UK, and you started to recognise that, fame can actually be quite fleeting. And you're very early age at that point. So 20, 21, I guess.
Yeah.
Was that a valuable lesson to learn at that age?
It was. I was running. Couldn't get work as an actor. I was struggling, going out a lot, kind of getting a lot of attention because I was still on TV there. And it was my dad. It was a phone call with my parents, and my dad saying, "Are you going to get a job?" Or something innocent that he said to me, and I got really defensive and hung up the phone. But my parents never have said things like that to me. So I think something struck a chord, and it had been a couple of years of, just partying and hanging out and kind of glowing in this fame that was dwindling. And it's not for lack of trying, but really I needed to change. I needed to come up with something else or do something else. And that's when I met the music manager, Anne Barrett, who started introducing me to songwriters, and that's where everything changed. But yeah, I mean, I was skint. Times were tough, but it's great because I think as soon as you learn that curve of, you get attention when an album's out and then people forget who you are, or once you realize it's not about you, it's a great tool to have, because things wash over me. I don't buy into the fame side of things. So I'm actually really grateful for those times.
Yeah. And so when does Torn come into your orbit?
I think there's probably around 2 years of writing. Phil Thornalley and I collaborated on a lot of other songs. And it was just another song that he said, I've got this song that I co-wrote with these guys in LA, and they put it on their album, but do you want to hear it? And it just was obviously, it's not often, there's been years after that where I've tried to find cover songs. And it's not easy to find them that resonate with you, that feel like your truth. And that one did straight away. And
when it became such a huge success, were you prepared for that? Because I understand that you were actually quite nervous about how your singing career was going to actually be received because of the baggage that comes from being on a show like Neighbours. But yeah. So you're fearful in that regard, but then you put this song out and it just connects like nothing else. Do you remember the moment you realized that it's happening?
Yeah, because when I was shooting the video, I was just thinking, I'm going to get so much grief. So if you watch the video with that in mind, there's a slight defensive, defiant, I will prove you wrong in the way I'm singing. And I just remember thinking I'm going to do this gig and people are going to throw stuff at me and I'm going to be fine. Like tomatoes, I think it was specifically.
Really?
I really thought, I guess I was preparing myself for the worst case scenarios. And so then it was like, oh my gosh, they don't hate me. They're not giving me a hard time. This is confusing. They love me. They love the song. Oh no, now they think I'm good. What do I do? I'm faking it. I'm a fraud, and now everyone's watching. Yeah. But I made a decision to make friends with the song because I'll be singing it forever. And I hate going to a gig and, my favorite band doesn't play the hit song because they're just over it. So that was the first thing. This song is the biggest blessing ever and make friends with it. And the other thing was, this is never going to happen in this way ever again in your career. Enjoy it. Just enjoy, savor it. You'll never win this many awards necessarily. It was so extraordinary what happened that I did somehow have the understanding, don't expect to top this. I don't know. Somewhere in me was just make your peace with this experience and try and just savor every moment. So I did.
You did manage to savor it? You did manage to enjoy the moment?
I was a bit scared, but I did enjoy it.
Because you see, I've read reports from back then of, you going to Madonna's post-Grammys party with Bono and moving in this world of absolute megastars. Is there still part of you going, I'm just from Berkeley Vale? Like, do I belong here?
Yeah, it's usually other people reminding me.
Okay.
Oh, that person just looked at you and I'm like, what are you talking about? No one's looking at me. I think you also develop, if you're someone that shies away from being in the public eye, it's amazing the blinkers you develop of just kind of fibbing to yourself or not really connecting with that side of it, maybe for pure survival. But I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I think there was a crazy period of that. And I'm not really in that zone anymore of that level of hanging out with megastars. And, things are pretty chilled in Oxfordshire. So, but yeah, it was a wild ride. I'm grateful for all those experiences. And I did have a blast.
That's good. Have you ever met Edna Swap, the band that recorded Torn originally?
Yeah, I did. I tried to write with them on the second album.
Okay.
And they just tried to kind of give me songs they'd written and I walked out.
Right.
Is that a bit of an overshare? I said, I'm trying to learn to be a songwriter. I'm not here to take another cover song. And it sounds like that's what you're interested in doing. So I left.
When you think back to that period.
And they said, Sinead O'Connor's got one of our songs. And I said, well, she can have it, but I want to write. Bye.
Right. Well, I guess that's when you sell 7 million copies of the album, that gives you a certain confidence and a certain ability to do that. Did you feel emboldened?
No, I felt sad that they didn't want to help me write a song.
Okay.
I felt kind of like, oh, that's a shame because I was big fans of their work, obviously. So I was quite sad. Because I would have hoped that they would have just wanted to help me to have that experience as a writer. I certainly would want that for someone coming up through the ranks.
When you think about that period, is there a pinch me moment which always sticks with you? Just a moment where you thought, this is incredible. I can't believe I'm in this moment right now.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Probably sitting at the Grammys with a nomination.
Right.
That was... And I think I was really sick with bronchitis, and I remember being really scared that if I got called up, I wasn't, which sounds ridiculous, but I was worried I wouldn't be able to speak. And there was an element of relief when I didn't win. And then I was like, oh, hang on a minute, I wanted to win. But it was Lauryn Hill from the Fugees who won I think it was Best Newcomer. But yeah, how wild was that to even be there?
In the back of your mind at that point, are you thinking about the album that would become White Lily's Island? Are you thinking, all right, album number 2, how am I going to do this again?
Not in that moment, but very soon after, when all the promo died down, the fear set in. And that's when, I guess, the other side to being in the public eye and having success kicked in, which is where I became quite agoraphobic. And I moved to Windsor and I hid because I was fed up of people saying, how's the second album going? And It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I was in a very spiritual period. I think I dove into, in my early 20s, found meditation. I'd spent a lot of time in an ashram in upstate New York, and I studied Siddha Yoga, Siddha, under Gurumai Chidvilasananda, which just sounds very out there, but I learned a lot of skills through that Eastern philosophy that really set me in my stride for that period, and wrote that album from a very centered place. Although there was a lot of insecurity and everything, I kind of dove into my meditation practice, and it really did help me complete that album. Finishing that album was an achievement because it was very, very hard. There was so much insecurity. And, Pat Leonard, who I wrote That Day with, who's famous for obviously all the Madonna tracks in the 80s, I remember him we were writing that day, and it was a stream of consciousness. And he's like, I don't think we're meant to break it. And I said, but there's no chorus. He said, so what? Who says you have to have a traditional chorus?
Yeah.
And then I got brazen and put it out as a first single, and people were so confused. And it got slated. But years later, even now, people talk about that album quite fondly. And people come up to me and say that album saved my life. And I feel like it's because I talk about having integrity and writing from a particular place of truth. The songs find their home, they find their audience. I don't need to be top of the charts or the most popular person. I think you've just got to be who you are.
So did the practices that you learned in that ashram and the meditation, when the reviews came in from White Lilies Island and they weren't great, some of them, did that help you through that period?
My managers hid the reviews. I, about 6 months later, found a whole photocopied stack of them and started flicking through and nearly had a panic attack and put it away. So I didn't read them, but I could just tell. I kind of knew it was going to be like that. It was a difficult period. Yeah, I was very skinny through that period, and I was quite agoraphobic. I think there was definitely psychologically some stuff going on in trying to cope. So I would say that, yeah, thank God I'd learned meditation. I was doing this thing called the Guru Gita, which is an hour and a half every morning. So I guess it was getting me through.
What do you do in it?
You chant this text.
For an hour and a half?
Yeah. And it does put you in an incredibly amazing flow state. But there was also, I guess, that period of when you dive into something and you make that your identity, of letting that go as well and keeping the best parts of that. And then I did the TM course, which was like a stripped back version of what I'd already studied, with a lot of the cultural stuff away and just the practicality of it. So then I kind of rediscovered, I have the tools. I don't have to do all of this every day, all of the time, and make a dogma, because, it was that I was trying to get away from.
So then you fast forward to doing the Come to Life album, and as you mentioned earlier, it didn't get the release outside of Australia and New Zealand. And you've just reached a breaking point at that point. You've decided, I've had enough of music. Then when you go off and you do your acting course and you also do the X Factor, was there some sort of encounter in a coffee shop that pulled you back into music? Did I read that somewhere, that you met someone in a coffee shop that encouraged you to come back?
I was with Rachel Hunter. We were having something to eat. I can't remember the cafe's name, but we were in LA, and Stephen Greener came up and started chatting to us. And he's like, you should be a singer. And I was like, oh, I used to be. He didn't know who I was. It's quite funny. But we got chatting, and then he's like, oh my gosh, of course I know that song. I know some great managers. You should meet in New York. And he just didn't let it go. We exchanged numbers, and he just kept saying, I really feel like you should be doing music. And, sometimes these things are sent to just tap you on the shoulder, and he just was relentless, and grateful to Stephen for that, because he did get me to New York, and I did meet my managers who were very supportive and, ended up doing that male album. So
right.
I think it all works out, you can look back and you can be bitter and twisted about certain things that I told you earlier on about the covers album. But then I just think, everything in my life that at the time might seem like a bad thing is a good thing. And it springs to mind this book called The Surrender Experiment. And I think I'm trying more and more to see things that seem like obstacles as just opportunities to grow. And I just think it's an easier way to have a human experience.
Yeah.
Because I don't think bitterness is helpful in any way. I think it's bad for your health and it doesn't get you anywhere. And most of the time, these periods have been such a rich growth period in my life that they've contributed to the songs on Firebird. I mean, it's so rich with stories of things I've lived through. And so I wouldn't have had those experiences if everything had gone great. I might just write really boring, happy, joyful, weird, flat songs. I'm sure you've heard songwriters say it can be the hard times or difficult periods that are great for songwriting. And it's cliche, but it is a bit true. The most frightening thing is being happy and trying to write those kind of songs. Sometimes when you're really happy, songwriting's a struggle.
Yeah. Was there a point in your life though where you really took that to heart, that you had to be unhappy to write songs?
Oh, I think like every teenager or going through my 20s, I think there was an indulgence in the melancholy. I think I've always led towards that. I don't indulge it as much anymore because I think there's like real things as you get older that, struggles in life. You have less of a need for it. But I love that period of growth of your life where, romance and everything's ahead of you and you're like, oh my gosh, and the wonderment that you lose through the hard knocks of life. I think it's such a beautiful time. And that indulgence in that melancholy is just so sweet to me. I remember sitting there and listening to PJ Harvey and going, yeah, so dark. I look back fondly on those times.
Well, who was informing your musical taste at that point?
Well, I dated a drummer in Melbourne, Peter Maslin. He introduced me to a lot of great music. He introduced me to Chaka Khan and all kinds of artists when I was living in Melbourne. And then I think the next person that really opened my eyes to a lot of great music was John Witherspoon. It's Tori Amos's tour manager, who then became her manager, I think. And I'd met him after a Tori Amos gig in Melbourne. And it's like, whenever you're in the UK, here's my number. Well, don't say that to an Australian. We're going to call. We're going to turn up on your doorstep, which I did. Hi, I'm in town. Let's hang out. And so I remember being in his living room and playing his record collection and hearing Tom Waits' Asylum Years and being mind blown. And, Joni Mitchell, Courtney Spark, and just artists like that and going, oh my goodness. So that was a really kind of early 20s. So a little bit in Melbourne, but definitely John Witherspoon really introduced me to a lot of great music.
Because prior to that, when you were growing up, I understand the Carpenters were quite big in your household. Your dad was a big fan of the Carpenters. Who else were you hearing growing up?
My dad listened to the Carpenters, the Mamas and the Papas, the Beatles a lot. So car journeys with the Carpenters and the Beatles. And we'd all sing the songs. And Peter, Paul and Mary. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And okay. I guess that was kind of it. My mum wasn't big into music. And then I guess the first artists I remember being into was Michael Jackson, Thriller, and Whitney Houston. So that's kind of memories I have of doing concerts for my family. I was obsessed with Whitney Houston.
Okay. Well, because, I know your younger sister, Laura, and, she's a musician as well, just sort of gone down a more indie route. Why do you think two musicians, I don't know if your other sisters are musicians, but why do you think two musicians came out of that household?
I'd like to think she's the real artist in the family. Laura was the one, I'm in the industry, and like I said to you, my gift is as a communicator, but I think she's a true artist in the sense of the word, in that she was in her bedroom with her guitar, Anna-racking, listening to albums. And she was cooler than me when she was 4 because she was like, you listen to that band? You can't. I'm like, why? She's like, because they're shit. So she always was opinionated and she honed her skill. It was important to her. She's just always been who she is. I remember when she was wearing her socks up and I was like, you're going to get teased. Laura, you need to wear short socks. She's like, I don't want to. And then she was like, I hate the beach. And I'm like, but you live on the Central Coast. You're not going to be popular. She's like, I hate sand. She's very monotone the way she talks. Well, I hate sand. And she had the wide-rimmed hat when everyone had a cap. She's just cool. She's just always been cool. And so it's no surprise to me that, she's carved her own path.
Sure.
And strangely, zero competition or jealousy, or that doesn't exist with my siblings. We're very supportive of each other. I love her. I'm so proud of her. I mean, her artwork that she does, where she did the Mad magazine cover, you know, she saves up and makes her own EPs. And so, you know, I just think it's super cool. She's got great taste. She's got better taste than me, I think.
Right. Lastly, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people you'd give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
So many. Definitely Phil Thornalley for taking the time to kind of help teach me for that first album. And you know, he really took the time. I would say Anne Barrett, that first manager, really had a lot to do with it. My parents for kind of not putting out the flame and letting me fly. Yeah. They're the important ones, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
So many people along the way, though, that have,
of course,
have contributed. And my current managers for letting me take the time to make this record.
Yeah,
Polly
great.
and Ali.
Speaking of this record, and this is the last question, do you remember hearing it back for the first time, completed?
The beautiful thing about this, it was recorded in lockdown. And so we were afforded the luxury of having more time to hone it. So by the time, I mean, much to their annoyance, I was tweaking details and sounds. I had so much more time to do that. And normally there's deadlines, but things got extended and there was more time. So what was beautiful is when I heard it finish for the first time, there was nothing that wasn't perfectly in place. So it was just a great feeling. The only thing that was missing was the track Firebird and the title of the album, which came later, which came when I was doing the artwork with Simon Proctor. And I have to give him credit because in discussing, I sent him the music, and in talking about feeling like a phoenix out of the ashes and the themes on the album, you know, he created this whole Firebird imagery. And I was like, oh, I'm a Firebird. I have to write the song. And I remember Alistair, the head of BMG, was like, there's no time. And I was like, Romeo Stoddard from the Magic Numbers. I was like, no pressure. We have to write the title track in 24 hours. So, yeah, that was the final piece. And funnily enough, it's like the overarching theme to the whole album. So.
And it's a beautiful song, beautiful way to end the album as well.
Thank you.
Natalie, thank you so much for your time. It's been so great to chat with you. And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Natalie for her time, and thank you for listening. If you have any feedback on the show or suggestions on who you'd like me to interview, or even if you just want to say hello, please drop me a line at humansofmusic@jaxsta.com. That's humansofmusic, one word, at Jaxsta, JAXSTA.com. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.